Hi everyone, Trina Phoenix here, and I wanted to read some more with the alchemy book. And this is Saint Germain on alchemy, and we were into the foundation of the United States, and we will be getting into the mystical origins. So we were just getting into the part of where we were getting into Francis Bacon and his influence on writing the Bible. And he was actually the first founding Freemason. He started the first lodge of Freemasons. So we were learning about Francis Bacon, and they think that he could possibly be the hidden writer known as Shakespeare. So he was a very interesting character and mysterious, and nobody actually knew where he came from or actually what his age was. So he wrote some powerful works, and he had the idea that human knowledge and of arts and science and human knowledge, and he also wanted to restore man to mastery over nature. And I think this meant more of our primal urges than like dominating the environment. So Freemasons laid the foundation for national unity in America and helped to direct the course of the revolution. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, Alexander Hamilton, and nearly all the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were Masons. George Washington on the right wore the Masonic collar, sash, and apron while laying the cornerstone on the Capitol. The apron below was a gift to Washington from fellow Mason, the Marquis de Lafayette. And this is the picture they show. Let me see too. This is a picture they had of Francis Bacon. Okay, so secretly Bacon founded the first Rosicrucian Brotherhood. The Rosicross Literary Society. Rosy Cross. I guess that would be how you would pronounce it. Rosy Cross. Literally, society was the first lodge of the free, accepted, or speculative Freemasons, or Masons. So it was just called Masons back then. But what Bacon did for England is dwarfed by the unseen work that he performed on behalf of his great dream, the establishment of a new Atlantis. In addition to everything else, Bacon secretly laid the groundwork for the establishment of the United States of America. Bacon entitled an allegorical literary work about utopian commonwealth, the New Atlantis. Perhaps it was inspired by his recollection of the Atlantean Golden Age, thought to be an allegorical reference to America. The book is said to contain the keys of the rituals of Freemasonry. Bacon, the master mason, built for the future. In building for the future, one must instill in others the vital essence of one's own purpose. Bacon's dreams were realized because the early Masons embraced his purpose. Although few Masons today understand the inner meaning of their own traditions, W.L. Wilmshurst, author of The Meaning of Masonry, points out that Masonry offers a philosophy of spiritual life of man and a diagram of the process of regeneration. The philosophy is symbolically embodied in its 33 degrees, or steps of initiation. According to Wilmshurst, from grade to grade, the candidate is being led from an old to an entirely new quality of life. He begins his Masonic career as the natural man, and he ends it becoming, through its discipline, a regenerated, perfected man. He rises from the dead a master, a just man made perfect, with a larger consciousness and faculties, an efficient instrument for use by the great architect in his plan of rebuilding the temple of fallen humanity, and capable of initiating and advancing other men to a participation in the same great work. The real purpose of modern Masonry is not the social and charitable purposes to which so much attention is paid, but the expediting of the spiritual evolution of those who aspire to perfect their own nature and transform it to a more godlike quality. The challenge of Masonry is to be reborn, incorruptible, which must be preceded by the death of the lower nature. The Masonic third degree is the allegorical crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Hiram Abiff, the teacher or guru who is analogous to Christ. Thus, the intention of Masonry is not building of a temple, but the greater science of soul building on a macrocosmic scale as applied to America. This meant the resurrection of the Golden Age, civilization of Atlantis, by the resurrection of the divine identity of her citizens in the new Atlantis. Bacon was an unheralded partner in the Virginia Company that established a settlement in Virginia. He was a confidant of the English explorer, soldier, courtier, writer, and colonizer Sir Walter Raleigh, and received correspondence from John Smith, who became president of the Jamestown colony. After being saved from death at the hand of Powhatan, the chief's daughter, Pocahontas. Wow. Because Bacon, I forgot about that. John Smith was saved by Powhatan, the chief's daughter, Pocahontas. That's right. Because Bacon worked behind the scenes. There are only a few identifiable traces of his work in the New World. In 1910, he was honored by Newfoundland on the tricentennial commemorative stamp, the guiding spirit in colonization schemes. With a flowering of Masonry in America, the prophecy of the Restoration was nearly fulfilled, but not quite. America was still a British possession. In the mid-1700s, the spirit of revolution swept the American colonies. It grew out of reaction to the British tyranny, and the Great Awakening, a religious revival that gave rise to the belief that God had founded a new Israel in America. The Great Awakening gave impetus to the Millennium Movement, which took things one step further, a belief that God would establish in America a millennial kingdom as promised in Revelation 20. Christ would then reign 1,000 years. The religious millennium language adapted the framework of apocalyptic history to commonly held political ideas. American liberty was God's cause. British tyranny was the Antichrist's. Sin was failure to fight the British. It takes more than a fiery sentiment to make a revolution. It takes organization. The Masons, and only the Masons, were sufficiently organized. It is the great seal of the United States. It is an emblematic representation of the mission and the identity of the American people portrayed by the great eagle, the pyramid, the mottos, and the numerological symbols. And they show this symbol. And then it says, the eagle is the ancient symbol of spiritual vision, without which people would perish. The olive branch in the right talon indicates the rule of the Prince of Peace by the authority of Jehovah. Jehovah, a name for God, is taken from the Hebrew verb to be. More literally, that which was, is, and will be. Thus, Jehovah signifies that which transcends time and space. I am that I am. That also is the meaning of Christ. As Lord revealed himself to Moses. This was where this information supposedly came from was Moses. So, the gift of the name, the lost world of Masonry, the lost word of Masonry, was the dispensation for the 12 tribes who were destined to establish peace in America through their realization of the inner Christ. Consciousness, or the Masonic Hiram Abiff, is the archetype of each one's real self, the mediator between the soul and the universe spirit. Wow, the soul and the universe spirit. Wow. The number 13 is used so frequently in the Great Seal that even those who love coincidences would be compelled to admit that this designer had a purpose in mind. The spirit of 76 is composed of digits which add up to 13. The eagle holds 13 arrows in his left talon. There are 13 pieces for the escutcheon, or coat of arms. The motto, Annuit Copius, Coptis, has smiled on our undertakings, is the meaning, and e pluribus unum, one out of many. Both have 13 letters. There are 13 rows of masonry on the pyramid. The frequent repetition of the 13 reflects the determination of the founding fathers to remind us that we are the 12 tribes, and the 13th is the Levites of Israel. The incomplete pyramid is symbolic of the great work of perfecting the soul unto the image of the living Christ, and the nation into a golden age. Doubtful that the American Revolution could have ever happened without them. According to historian Bernard Fay, Masonry alone undertook to lay the foundation for national unity in America. It fostered a feeling of American unity in a small but prominent class of people. There could have been no United States without it. Because the states were too deeply divided among themselves by the 1760s, there was hardly a town, big or small, where Masonry was not preaching the fraternity and unity. By 1773, Boston was the center of American discontent. Feelings were running high. When the colonial tempers rose, there was a revolutionary movement ready to direct the spirit of resistance. The Masons. What made the tempers rise? The tax on tea. Who hosted the first act of revolution in America? The Masons. And the affair? The Boston Tea Party. On December 16th, 1773, Masons from the St. Andrew Lodge in Boston and some of the local radicals dressed as Indians and sailed to the British ships and dumped the tea. Victorious Indians sailed into shore and with songs and hurrahs marched into a local tavern and disappeared inside. They were never again seen. Later, however, a lot of excited Masons were seen leaving the place. America owes an unending debt of gratitude to George Washington for the success of the Revolution and the establishment of the Republic. The fact that the colonies fielded an army at all from 1776 to 1783 was due alone to Washington. Always with his soldiers, he was the general in the field. His example buoyed up their morale. He wrestled with Congress to procure food and ammunition, and when Congress became entirely helpless, he kept his men alive out of his own pocketbook. The clergy proclaimed that he was an instrument of God, one of thy own sons, who saved the country. They called him the great preserver, so great a deliverer. They compared him to Moses and Joshua and Gideon. Whenever Benjamin Franklin could not persuade the French king to give the American revolutionaries further material assistance, Washington prevailed by sending his own aid, de camp to Versailles, and by prayer. Like no other, Washington put his life and his fortune and his sacred honor on the line for the cause. Washington was a master Mason. In fact, he was a master of masters. Masons seemed to be the moving force that Masons seemed to be the moving force at every key step in the building of a new nation. Paul Revere was a Mason. Estimates vary, but many as 53 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Masons. All but 5 of the 55 members of the Constitutional Convention were Masons. All the leading generals in the Continental Army were Masons. The leading lights of the revolutionaries were Masons. Among them, Alexander Hamilton, John Marshall, James Madison, General Nathanael Greene, General Charles Lee, General John Sullivan. They united around their rising son, George Washington. George Washington's role in creating the new government was at least as important as his military role. Serving as president of the Constitutional Convention, he was the sun in the midst of the solar system that held the states together. It is doubtful that the states would have so patiently forged a union had he not been there. Not only was he universally recognized as the only acceptable candidate for the first president, but he was the office incarnate. No one at the Constitutional Convention had any idea what the president would be like, except that he would be like Washington. They created the office and established its requirements by their perception of his virtues. The great efforts of Bacon and Washington came to fruition with the adoption of the Constitution, a document that embodied the principles of brotherhood. It provided that each individual would prosper based upon his own efforts. The civil application of the initiatic path of the Masons, and it protected by law freedoms such as no land had ever enjoyed: speech, religion, press, and assembly. Each person might then be free to work out his individual destiny as he saw fit. Thus, with the great gathering of the elect in the promised land, there was reestablished the community of those who were free, not only to keep the Lord's covenants, but to elect to do so by the gift of free will. It was a community based on true individuality. Individuality proceeds from the Hiram Abiff of the Masonic tradition, the inner Christ, the Emmanuel of Isaiah, of whom it is prophesied. The government shall be upon his shoulder. This idea was embodied in the American notions of the individual sovereignty. And God has smiled on our undertakings. Annuit coeptis. Thus reads the motto on the Great Seal of the United States. Once despairingly called a dull emblem of Masonic fraternity, Masonic, yes, but it is anything but dull. The seal's symbolism proclaims the true identity of the American Israelites in the tradition of the ancient mysteries. The motto, Novus Ordo Seclorum, represents the great work that the Masons had made their own, the establishment of the new order of the ages. A considerable number of early Americans apparently accepted the presence of the divine intervention of heavenly intercessors as a natural part of their life. The art and the literature of this period frequently showed this. This is the commemoration of Washington, and it depicts two angels, time and immortality, lifting Washington into heaven. This and other works, executed both before and after his passing, show that many Americans believed in a heavenly hierarchy and revered Washington as the patriarch of our nation. And this is one of the murals that they have of Washington. See, he's being lifted by the angels, and there's soldiers bowing at his feet. And it says commemoration of Washington. He was depicted, it depicted angelic beings, gods and goddesses, in clouds of glory. The goddess of liberty, patroness of their sacred cause, was perhaps the most revered of all the heavenly hosts. Interesting. The goddess Liberty was perhaps the most revered of all the heavenly hosts. In 1775, Thomas Paine honored her in a ballad called Liberty Tree. In a chariot of light from the regions of day, the goddess of liberty came. 10,000 celestials directed her way, and hither conducted the dame, a fair budding branch from the gardens above, where millions with millions agree. She brought in her hand a pledge of her love, and the planet she named Liberty Tree. It was the goddess of liberty who appeared to George Washington and gave him the vision of 3 trials that America would face. The first trial was the Revolutionary War. The second was the Civil War. And the third is held at bay by the invisible hand. How many times have we heard our president speak about the invisible hand? While we the people yet resolve by law and by love, the fate will be of our destiny. This period of crisis was foreseen not only by George Washington, but also by the prophet Daniel, who wrote, "And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation seen that same time." Historian Arnold Toynbee used a phrase, time of troubles, to describe the chaos that accompanies the disintegration of civilizations. From a historian's point of view, many agree that we are now living in a time of troubles. Despite our nation's new buoyant mood, feelings alone will not see us through this crisis. We are vulnerable to any number of potential disasters: economic collapse, nuclear war, crime, pollution, toxic waste, and dangerous new technologies, not to mention the genetic engineering of the coming race. Guys, this was written in the 1980s. It will take more than an enlightened leadership to meet this challenge. No mere mortal can solve all of our problems. Wherever the Israelites charted a course independent of God, the results were calamitous. If the ancient Israelites could not solve their problems without God, should we be so foolish as to try? Tony B. said that a civilization in the time of troubles would collapse if its people did not go through the process of spiritualization from within, or, as he called it, etherealization. He was looking towards a veritable revolution in a higher consciousness. That is the key to salvation and the moral regeneration for which America was established. Now that we know who we are and the nature of our legacy, we should do to survive the chaos theory. The chaos theorized by Tony B., foreseen by Washington, prophesied by Daniel, and predicted by our Lord as the Great Tribulation. We, the people, ought to be comforted and strengthened by the message of history that God in his heavenly hierarchy, the great white brotherhood, conceived, bore, watches over, and is involved in the affairs of our nation. We ought to get personally involved in finding the solutions to our problems. But most of all, American Israelites should do what their fathers did. Call upon the Lord after all. Would the God of history and the God of Israel let his people so many millennia and then abandon them at the last moment? Not if he remains true to himself and to us, and the I am that I am of the Exodus is the faithful and true, the same, the word of revelation. As all the adepts in the tradition of Christ have taught, prayer is a spiritual technique which combines the esoteric sciences of sound and invocation to create thought forms on inner planes. These have the power to change the course of events in the world of form because their fulcrum is the word itself. In these final days, we are reminded by the holy angels to address our calls not only to the Archangel Michael, with whom the Lord named to Daniel as the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people, but also the great adept of the brotherhood, who would sponsor the United States of America and the presiding master of the Aquarian Age, Saint Germain. It is an irony of history that the name Saint Germain isn't on every schoolchild's tongue, that every American president has not earnestly thought of his counsel. For it was Saint Germain who was embodied as the Christ-bearer colonizer, Christopher Columbus, and as the founder of the Freemasonry, Francis Bacon. And who but Saint Germain held the vision of a new Atlantis based on the principles of spiritual freedom and civil liberty for millennia? Indeed, Saint Germain. He worked tirelessly for the reassembly of the tribes of Israel and Judah in the New World, and labored to infuse the land of his dreams with one virtue, for which he gave his life again and again: freedom. Saint Germain invites us to rise to a higher level of consciousness, to find immortality in God, to be free. And if that isn't what the mystical traditions of America is all about, then what is? So every 4th of July, remember that behind the effect of the joy felt by the millions, from those who brass bands and fireworks and watermelons and the all-star game, the carefree atmosphere of summer, there is a cause, the cause of freedom, the cause of Saint Germain, the cause of the saints that move among us robed in white. And when you hear those old patriotic songs, listen to the lyrics. They express a true love and recognition for the great white brotherhood and Saint Germain, the master alchemist who translated our Father's gift of free will into the greatest system of political, economic, and spiritual freedom the world had ever seen. Our Father's God, to thee, author of liberty, to thee we sing. Long may our land be bright with freedom's holy light. Protect us by thy might, great God our King. That's one of the songs that they used to sing long time ago. The overleaf. Okay. Then they explain, the Royal Teton Retreat is the principal spiritual force of the Great White Brotherhood on the North American continent. It is located in the heaven world congruent with the Grand Teton, the tallest peak in the Teton Range. The spiritual flame of precipitation, a flame that encompasses science, abundance, and supply, burns on an altar at the Royal Teton Retreat. This flame has endowed the American people with a capacity for pragmatism and for manifesting the abundant way of life. Saint Germain and other ascended masters conduct courses at the Royal Teton Retreat for those pursuing a path of soul mastery. At this University of Spirit, souls are also tutored in divine illumination and the practical application of its ideas. If you would like to be tutored at the soul level at this etheric retreat, you can ask the angels to escort you there in your finer body while you sleep. And this is a picture they show. Washington's visions of America's trials. We will get into that one next. So I hope you guys are enjoying. I love you all so much. I think this is interesting information, and it seriously gets much deeper. So I will see you soon. Thank you so much for being here. I love you all, and have a great day or night wherever you may be, and favor and love to you all. See you soon.